Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on PPE Forum today. We have a special session today focused on the opportunities and the challenges that healthcare investment offers to private equity firms or general investors. Today, I am joined by David Porter, who's the founding partner of Apposite Capital, as well as joining us today, Derek Colvin, who's Group CTO at Marcol. Thank you very much for joining us. David, I would please feel free to start by introducing yourself.
No, thank you very much for the introduction and letting me have a few words on Apposite and myself. My background is about 30 years in private equity. I started in large buyouts and gravitated very quickly to lower mid-market healthcare, which I've been doing for about 20 years. When I founded Apposite Capital, we are a healthcare specialist private equity investor. Our healthcare definition is quite wide. It starts in social care, goes through healthcare services, pharma services. It includes medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health as well. And to navigate such a wide area, we have a very big coterie of advisors, over 100, who help us with such a wide base. Our DNA is to have a double bottom line, both a EBITDA or a profits growth bottom line and an impact bottom line. And we're very concerned about doing business in an ethical way and making sure that we help the healthcare system to provide better healthcare for more people, basically. And our other DNA is that we take small companies and make them a lot bigger. And we are very present with our companies. We're not, here is some money, we'll see you in a few years. We're much more in the trenches. And we've had some great successes across the piece. We invest in platforms in Europe, but once we have a platform in Europe, our company can buy anywhere in the world as an inorganic addition, as well as organically growing quite fast. That's probably enough about me.
Thank you so much, David. Derek, please, if you could, tell us a few words about yourself and Marcol as well.
Thanks, Khaled, and also, like David, appreciate the opportunity to be able to share some thoughts today. My name's Derek Colvin. I'm the Group CTO for Marcol. We are a mid-market private equity firm in London. We act more like a family office. I think it's probably safe to say, rather than a kind of strict PE or VC investor. Since 2015, the business has been around since 1976, primarily as a real estate investor. But since 2015, we've been heavily involved in the healthcare sector. Across 4 pillars: telemedicine, pharmacy, diagnostic imaging, and population health management. Like David's business, we are very much hands-on, so we are both the investor and quite involved in the operation of the businesses as well. So find myself getting involved, to use David's word, in the trenches quite a lot. Also, like Apposite, we tend to build platform businesses. So we take small companies, we tend to roll them up, build a platform, and then use that platform as a either jumping on or jumping off point for other businesses that add value anywhere in the world.
Thank you very much, David. I'll start, if you don't mind, with you. And if you could give us a broad view of the healthcare segments today, and where are the biggest challenges that are being faced?
Yeah, the challenges are inflation in all its forms, and some supply problems, which are easing, but there are still some supply problems. This sort of mediates it in the fact that sometimes if you don't have a situation where you have pricing power yourself, you can find yourself squeezed between higher costs and the inability to pass them on. In other sectors, you do have pricing power and it's not such a problem, but that is a big challenge. The second one for us is that we're not massive leverage hounds, but we do use leverage. And obviously the cost of leverage has pretty much doubled in fact, a little bit more in some cases over the last 18 months to 2 years. That obviously is a drag on companies. Obviously, both these things, increased cost and debt, are not just healthcare problems, they're sort of every industry problems, but there are also issues here. And the other thing is that there are in some areas, because of the economy, when it's a retail or quasi-retail facing healthcare company, it can have a demand problem because obviously the cost of living is squeezing people's incomes. If it's a government facing company, it can have an issue which is slightly different, which is that government budgets are being squeezed by other things that are required to be spent money on, and that is not helpful for our companies in recovering costs from governments as well. And then the other thing is that governments can be quite poor payers, so they don't pay as they should do. That's some of the challenges that we're seeing. They're different across the different sectors. If you take social care, where it's primarily government pay, the government pay issues and the inflation are probably the biggest issue, plus interest rates, because a lot of those companies are quite highly leveraged because they have very certain incomes. If you look at pharmaceutical services, there has been some loss of demand in some of those areas because of the slowdown in spending by governments and other people on research. If you go through to diagnostics, it can be, if it's a retail-facing diagnostic problem, the one I mentioned of general economic issues, or if it's a government-facing one, that can be an issue. In digital health, probably it's one of the sectors that is seeing perhaps too many companies that are not differentiated, and that's a bit of an issue. That's thankfully not a problem for our company in that area, but it is for some of them. That's a very quick canter through, but I think gives you an idea of the spread of the issues are pretty much everywhere, to be honest.
If I jump on what you're saying and these challenges, we might see that, sometimes new technologies help in mitigating these challenges and also opening up new opportunities. Derek, if you could share some, insights into what you see are key technological trends that, might mitigate some of these issues, or that, are shaping the future of healthcare investment. And also feel free to, say how your group navigates these shifts to identify opportunities as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think probably worth framing that Marcol's investments today they're reasonably late stage. So, we started this current round of investment back in 2015, 2016. So concept to operations been the thick end of about 8 years at this point. I think, when we started this process, what was relevant then, or what was at least becoming relevant, I think is probably still relevant today from a technology trends perspective. And, a lot of that continues to be driven, by pretty strong internal and external market forces. The big one actually being the urgent need to do more for less in healthcare systems. So when we think about technology innovation and technology trends that are going to play out over the next, or have been playing out and will continue to play out over the next sort of 4 to 5 years, I think probably bundled into 4 or 5 different areas. I think wearables and actionable health insight, where you're democratizing the feedback to the individual about their health in real time and giving them actionable insight from that. Apple being a good example. Artificial intelligence, I'll come to that in a second. As David has said, telehealth and remote care will continue to see significant investment, I think. To David's point as well, there's a differentiation problem there, and that's going to thin the market out to where there will probably only be 2 or 3 players standing. I see personalized medicine continuing to receive significant investment. And then a slightly dull and boring one, which, everybody's always racing ahead to talk about what's new, but we still have a significant legacy transformation problem in healthcare, and significant underinvestment in particular areas. And I can see quite a bit of capital flowing into that to accelerate that process. So just to go through these in a little bit more detail, wearables have been around for a while, but what we're seeing now is wearables that were previously limited to sort of clinical diagnostic use now being used in people's day-to-day lives. Continuous glucose monitors are a really good example of that, where we've taken something that was previously a diagnostic product for people with diabetes, is now being used by people who want to understand how to lose weight, how to improve athletic performance, how to sleep better. And I think extending those slightly tangential use cases for other wearables will become more prevalent through the coming years. I was reading the other day that there's a new wearable that does sweat analysis, and from that sweat analysis can tell you blood sugar, and it's only a matter of time before that extends out to other diseases. I think on the artificial intelligence point I mentioned, that is it's a bit of a black hole. I think it's very easy to say that AI is going to solve a bunch of problems, but actually nobody's got a clue how this is going to play out. I think there will be, if we think about conversational AI and LLMs, I can see the use of ChatGPT for cognitive behavioral therapy and other kind of mental health conditions where talking therapy is a proven therapy. AI is potentially companionship as well. There's a loneliness epidemic in America. 1 in 6, 2 in 1 in 3, I think it is now, people say that they are lonely on a day-to-day basis. So where's the intersection of AI and keeping people company? I think we're going to see an interesting intersection between biology and diagnostic imaging. So there'll be, as the models become more accurate over large diagnostic imaging data sets and comparing them against pathologies, I think we're going to see new diagnostics coming off the back of that. There's a really interesting one coming out of Oxford just now called Caristo, which looks at inflammation, which can't be detected by human reading. It looks at inflammation in cardiac vessels and gives a far better indication of whether the patient is likely to have a cardiac event other than just using current calcium scoring techniques. I think some drug development, continued improvements in protein folding maths and understanding how all of that works. And I'm sure that's something that probably David's business has a better understanding of than me. The big one that David mentioned, again, telehealth and remote. I think there was a WHO report that came out in September 2022, I think it was. And out of the 40 plus European countries that were surveyed, 1/3 of them had 40% of their doctors which were above the age of 55. So we sit on the edge of quite a big retirement problem. So, these people will be retiring inside a decade, assuming that retirement age is kind of 65. So how do we, we currently have a shortfall of, I think it's 2 million healthcare workers in the EU. That's not going to go away. So we need to think how technology is going to allow those systems to do more for less. And I think telemedicine is going to be a major part of that. Very briefly, the kind of personalized medicine point, I think, that's quite a well understood trajectory at this point. We become better, we become more attuned with the individual composition of people, and we tune medicines to benefit them as individuals rather than as a distribution inside a population, which is how it's currently done. I mentioned legacy transformation. Like I said, we're talking about cutting edge AI and diagnostic cardiac blah blah blah. You go into a hospital and people pull out a paper folder and they're writing stuff down, and that gets lost, and then there's 6 copies of it and you don't know where 5 of them go. That all has to change because that drives significant inefficiency, not just inefficiency from a kind of patient perspective, but it drives inefficiency from a cost perspective, inefficiency from a data collection and analysis perspective, inefficiency because it actually introduces patient risk as well. And I think that's something that obviously we want to try and drive out. So just in terms of the kind of navigation and identification part of the question, I think for us, we look at, for us, scalability is a big one, and scalability probably cuts across 2 or 3 different areas. Is this a product that we can take from an international perspective? So is there an internationalization element baked into that? Do you need regulatory approvals to do that? How do you introduce that technology, and is that technology going to be accepted by the stakeholders? Or are you having to displace an incumbent? Because that's always quite a long and quite expensive process. We think about integration. So, how sticky is this product? Because stickiness fundamentally drives value. And then sustainability, not just the vendor sustainability, but the uniqueness of the model itself. Is there a sufficient IP moat around it? What does technological displacement of that look like? Do we hit a technology redundancy problem at one point? So yeah, these are just some areas. Sorry, I hope I'm not overrunning here.
No, not at all, not at all. Thank you very much. I'll continue on what you're saying, and I'd love to ask you, David, do you see the use of technology and, let's say, innovation having a bigger impact where Derek mentioned, let's say, in healthcare providers and better management, or in innovation of new products or new diagnosis equipment? Where would you see a greater opportunity, if I may ask, David?
Firstly, I would really echo Derek's point about do more for less. I think that's absolutely key, because it's not only, as he rightly points out, the problem with not enough clinicians and everybody else in healthcare to actually handle the demographic trend that's global. But in addition to that, we just can't afford increasing costs all the time. And really to sort of home into that, I think this is in every single aspect of everything we do. We need to become more efficient, and we need to be using bots, i.e. RPA. We need to be using ML, AI everywhere. So the first thing we're trying to do at our shop is we're trying to make every one of our companies as efficient as possible. And that's using PDAs to effectively help or replace people to be more efficient. That's using AI and indeed generative AI to help all our companies to be able to be more efficient, but also make more of the data they've got and utilize it better. I mean, the one that I think about is obviously we have a genetics company. And again, Derek was talking a lot about precision medicine. And obviously one of the key planks to precision medicine is the genetics of a person, because that will tell you what they're likely to have as a problem in later life, or indeed in early life. And when they have that problem, particularly cancer, what is it really? Because it's not breast cancer, it's HER2, it's BRCA, it's whatever cancer. And the treatment plan is not because in the breast, what it is if it's turned in terms of operations or radiotherapy, but when it gets down to chemotherapy, it depends what the genetic issue is, i.e. what is the biological thing going wrong. So this is pervading every single part of our industry, and you can't really sensibly talk about innovation without going through all these software mediated things that are changing and making things that weren't possible absolutely possible. And Derek's absolutely right in the issue of mistakes in hospitals, from the really stupid one of chopping off the wrong arm, but right through to sending the person in the wrong direction, losing their paper so they can't have their whatever. That is just such an unforgivable wastage, and all of that will be improved by taking the paper out. We had one of our companies which we bought, it was a turnaround actually, I guess it was about 6 or 7 years ago, and the company was still using carbon paper for some of its processes. and unforgivable. When we sold it, it was 100% digital, no paper at all. But there are still, in the UK and the NHS, there are still hospitals with lots of bits of paper. And so I completely echo what Derek's saying. It's all got to go. All these innovations combined with the biological and the science innovations that are coming from a better understanding of the genome, of the biome, of the interaction between proteins and antibodies and just everything else, means that we will be able to have better and better therapies that are more individualized and eventually at more sensible costs. And all of that is about, basically for us, making our companies more efficient, more cost effective, more innovative than the competition, to stand out in the market and to get some, trade buyer preferably, who thinks I must have this for my strategy, to pay you a nice price when it comes to exit. That's in the end what we're looking for, and to do all that if we can with impact as well.
I'll continue with the data that you mentioned with AI and L that helps the use of data, and I wanted to check with you, Derek. I mean, as we move from this unstructured data towards everything digital and everything available, how do you manage that data privacy, especially, and security, especially in healthcare, which is a very sensitive segment?
It's the thing that keeps me awake at night, actually. I think data security and data privacy, particularly in the EU, is not a new issue. We've been working in a reasonably tight. I think the EU's actually got the strictest data safeguarding regs anywhere in the world, and they will continue to tighten, particularly with EU AI, which will be the AI framework for managing data decisions and how people interact with those AIs and decisions, what you can and what you can't do. It's funny, previously my background is as a systems engineer. I cut my teeth back in the mid-90s. I worked for Microsoft for quite a few years, and you just did stuff. You didn't really pay too much attention to what you were doing because you were just building product all the time. You were doing cool engineering stuff all the time. And whilst people are still doing all of that today, to your point, the focus has very much flipped, particularly in healthcare, to, yes, that's all nice, fine and well, but where is my data? How is it secured? How can you prove to me it's secured? How can you prove to me that you're using the data that you collected about me in the way that I've agreed for it to be used and collected? Can I see all of these questions? And these are right, fair, and proper questions and concerns that people have to have. I think what will be interesting is to see how other markets where data regulation is not as stringent as the EU, where governments have more leeway to make use of people's personal data, what happens there. And I think China would be a good example to see what emerges from China in terms of data-driven technological innovation over the next few years. How do we do it? It's tricky. We have to stay on top of these regulatory issues, and we take these regulatory issues and we embed those into our culture, our processes, our technology development practices. We have to make sure that there's a super healthy relationship between eager and excited developers and product managers that want to go off and build amazing things for customers. At the same time, they have a good and positive and open relationship with the compliance team, because the compliance team are the product teams are the ones that bring the money in, but the compliance teams are the ones that keep you out of jail. And that's quite an important relationship to make sure that that's in harmony. Apart from the issues where compliance goes wrong, at the end of the day, we work in a healthcare should be a high reliability organization type. In other words, there should be an extreme focus placed on how things are done process stability, change management, because the consequences of something going wrong are super high. David was mentioning before, these types of horrible events that happen in hospitals quite often happen because data things have gone wrong. I went into surgery to have my left leg amputated, and they amputated the right leg because somebody made a keyboard mistake on the form. Things like that happen. These are called never events in NHS language. They're called never events because they should never happen in the first place. So I think continually assessing how your organization is working, risk assessing your working practices, risk assessing your people, risk assessing your processes, risk assessing your standards, risk assessing your customer deployments. All of these things need to happen on a regular basis. The kind of hygiene factor stuff here is that your organization should absolutely be ISO 27001, for example, because then you're at least saying to the outside world, we will be good custodians and good stewards of your data because our working practices conform to this international standard. And these are, all of this, as I said earlier, these are things that teams previously didn't need to do. So there is a culture shift that comes with this. With that culture shift, I think comes leaders who understand that their role isn't just as a product person or an engineering person. Their role as a leader is to resource manage their team in a way that their team can come to them and raise concerns about how data is being handled, concerns about how data is being presented, raise and challenge on ethical concerns about how data may be used, and have that kind of open culture inside a business. I think it's super important. And then backing all of that off into training and awareness inside the business, really from board level down to the people doing the work, I think is a critical pillar of an organization that deeply cares about the data compliance side. I mean, if you look at if we think about data as something that falls into the kind of ESG bucket, and I think David would probably agree with this, it has to be a board level consideration, and continually pushed at board level and reported against. I think finally, I would say once all of that is in place, you have the culture, you have the good working practices, you have audit, you have assessment, you have risk management, all of that. Then you have to flip into the kind of operational. There has to be quite an extreme operational focus on security, and with that comes the continual operational focus on where's the data going, who's using it, how can I prove the person's using it is the person that they say they are. Am I sending out unencrypted data, or all of that sort of stuff? So you end up with this arc where the board cares and the engineers care who are deploying.
So now we know what keeps Derek up at night. David, is it the same thing, or is it bringing good returns to your LPs? And if so, if you could tell us a bit more about how are valuations today standing? We've seen coming out of the pandemic that there was a big rush of investments and demand for investment in healthcare. How has this changed now, and how do you see it moving forward?
Well, the factors that I mentioned in the sort of the challenges have inevitably had an effect on valuations, but the effect is probably less than maybe people expected because it's had a bigger effect on the number of transactions. So whereas when you were talking about coming out of the pandemic, healthcare was seeing an absolute boom in transactions, now it's extremely quiet. And many of the advisors are looking pretty long-faced because there's lots of work being done, but there's nothing actually happening. And that's inevitable because when you get a reduction, when you've had decades actually of rising valuations pretty much year in, year out, and very low interest rates, and then you have a complete sort of change in the market, inevitably it takes time for the market to adjust, and it hasn't really adjusted. So, what is happening, which is very few and far between, deals are at slightly lower valuations, but they're not. There's not a really great market, so I can't say what is necessarily the exact price for something like today, like you could 2 years ago. Looking forward, I think we've got a few more months of a problem, because I think that, unlike the norm, it's possibly going to take a little longer for interest rates to come off the peak. That certainly will be a factor when that starts happening, for improving the situation and increasing the number of transactions that occur, and probably stabilizing prices. I think the other thing is that there probably are a few more distress situations to occur before we get out of this as well. So short term, reasonably gloomy. On an 18-month view, I think we'll get back to business sort of as usual, although interest rates will not be 0. They'll be more like, I don't know, 2 or 3, something like that. So it will be a slightly different normal. It'll be the new normal, as everyone always talks about. So that would be my feeling. And so I think if you want to sell a company now, you have to make sure it's in really good shape. There's that bifurcation that always occurs in this sort of market, i.e., if your company's got any issues, you aren't going to get it away. It has to be really in good shape, which comes back to all these sort of rather boring but key things, like making sure your cyber is correct, your data protection is correct, your growth in earnings is correct, the story is correct, the future, all those things that are necessary have to be really, everyone has to be a tick box in this market. And the other thing is that, whereas in the heat of the moment in 21, deals were happening very rapidly, even without people seeing each other, now everyone diligences every single thing to a very detailed level, unsurprisingly, because the climate's changed.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to what seems to be, and both of you mentioned it, a game changer in terms of technology, and it's the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so, Derek, how do you look into the use of this technology? Because there's a lot of buzzwords being thrown around, and then we don't know what is applicable, what can be done, whether it's on the improving the patient experience or outcomes, or if it's on the simple operational efficiency of a healthcare provider. So how do you look at that when you evaluate or you help out one of your portfolio companies?
Probably the same way that we would evaluate any technology, actually. I think, technology has been displacing human activity since we invented stone tools and discovered agriculture. So this is just another technology that we have to figure out how to use. I think maybe where the difference lies with this is that I think this is going to happen much faster than any previous large technology cycles have happened. If we think about the 4 that I've seen since, in my time, we had the sort of PC boom of the 90s. We had the .com, so PC boom of the early 90s, internet boom from 96, 7 onwards, .com bust. Then we had mobile as a platform, and that took us from kind of 2008 up until now. And now we're at the start of this next generational thing, which will be AI. These cycles have generally taken sort of 10-ish years, 8 to 10 years between them, and have usually taken 3, 4, 5 years to hit the midpoint. I get the feeling that this is going to be compressed slightly. So whilst the same principles would apply to the evaluation of this technology with anything else, I think we're going to have to think about them faster. I think we're going to have to think about them faster because of the simple pressures that we're under, that David and I have both talked about. This need to do more for less will become ever more pressing. It's like a snowball kind of rolling down the hill just now and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So when we think about, general, how do you evaluate tech? Is it, is it going to drive efficiency? Is it going to drive quality? Is it going to drive throughput? And maybe we can add another one here, which is, does it drive better outcomes? Because that's really what we're in the business of doing. We're in the business of making people better, faster, or making them happier, quicker, whatever way you want to kind of cut this. So, for me, the big thing here is going to be about risk and risk mitigation. There is a lot of uncertainty about AI just now, particularly when we don't quite understand the inner workings of somebody else's black box. So that will have a higher focus during kind of technology due diligence. I think there'll be a higher focus placed on trying to understand the reliability and predictability of the output of an AI. I was at the FT AI Summit a couple of weeks ago, and I did actually, somebody was up on stage and they were talking about AI and how they were implementing it. And they asked a very similar question actually to what you've asked me today. And the lady said, the thing about AI is that actually nobody really knows how this is going to be deployed. Nobody really understands how to implement it in their business. Every board in the land is asking for the management team to have an AI strategy, but they don't quite understand what that is. At the same time, you have this kind of fear of missing out where everybody's like, well, we have to do an AI thing. We have to push that forward. But again, nobody really knows. So I think, we're going to find, and it's something that we're doing, we're going to find lots of experimentation. So we're going to be finding particular use cases where out of the 50 things we could do, we'll prioritize maybe 5 of them and we'll give one to 3 of them a try. And then based on the success of these, we'll potentially deploy even further. David made an interesting point earlier, which I scribbled down here, which is they're trying to use more of the data that they've got. And I think that's a key assessment when looking at how AI can help. One thing that legacy businesses have got, which benefits them in this AI race, is the businesses that have been around for longer have more data. Therefore, there is more potential actionable insights sitting in those data pools if you can extract it in a way that's meaningful and you can get value from it, blah, blah, blah. So if I think about one of our businesses, and I can give you a good example of where we have gone down the, make more use of the data that we've got. We have a business called Good Shape. It was previously called First Care. It historically was an absence management business. It managed the process of absenteeism on behalf of employers when employees were sick. So it took the reporting away from the employee and the employer, and we became a neutral service that could handle employees being sick and then also provide a level of service on top of that with nurses who could help the person get better a bit faster. Really what we were trying to do was to reduce the overall sickness rates for people. So say instead of being off for 5 days, you were back off for 5 days, you were only off for 3 days because you got good advice at the time. Over the years, that business built up a data bank of over 20,000 fit notes, which are the notes that are required when somebody has been ill and they're allowed to go back to the work. They're allowed to go back to work. These are issued by GPs. With the data that First Care, now Good Shape, recorded, which was, the industry that the person was in, why they were sick, how long they were going to be sick for, how they got sick, what part of the country they lived in, how long they'd worked there, whether they full-time, was it shift work. So we were collecting all of these rich data sets. We worked with a partner and we started to scavenge data points from that data set to build quite interesting models up. We developed four different models from the data that we had and managed to turn these into new products. And I'll give you two examples of the types of data that we managed to uncover using this new AI. Product number one is a tool that, based on particular patterns that are seen in absence data, predict when somebody's going to quit their job or not. So that could allow you to intercede early with that person and say, hey, is there a problem here? Can we talk? Is there something that's bothering you? Because as we know, when somebody leaves, there's a significant cost to the employer of bringing somebody else in. One of the other data points that we uncovered was for particular illnesses, we are, with a very, very high degree of certainty and confidence, can tell you whether that person is actually going to suddenly fall into an extended absence where a corporate health insurance scheme would then have to pick up the cost of their salary and benefits. So again, that's a sort of cost offsetting mechanism where we can services can intercede earlier to keep that person or to make that person better faster, so that the insurer doesn't then have to bear the costs of looking after them. So there's just some examples of how we've you think about AI and machine learning and how we've assessed the potential.
If we take the use of AI and the beginning of this implementation, David, you mentioned that the environment for exit is not perfect today. Is it a good environment for consolidation, thanks to technologies of being able to bring portfolio companies or outside and help them build up and grow this platform faster today through consolidations?
In theory, it should be, and to an extent it is, but it's like I was just saying, although one would expect, given the headwinds we have, that valuations would fall quite dramatically, they haven't fallen that much. So yes, the companies we have that are basically buy and builds, as we call them, where you grow your company organically, but a big element of the growth is also inorganic, i.e. buying similar companies. Yes, they are active, but they've been active for some time, and they're not finding that the things they're wanting to buy are hyper cheap. They're cheaper, but not hyper cheap, and they may get cheaper as time goes by. But I think it is a good time to be using RPA, that's software bots, and which is an old technology, and AI. The big difference, I think, between now and maybe 2 or 3 years ago is that in the past, if a company wanted to use RPAs for something, or it wanted to use AI, it had to go to an expert company, and they charged them an absolute fortune and took ages to do anything. Now, free with your Google or with your Microsoft package, you have something like Power Automate that allows you to do RPAs yourself very easily with ultra low code. And that's the big difference. And so I think, whereas these things were, oh my gosh, we're going to have to pay millions and it's going to go on for years to do an implementation, now you can do it yourself. And I think that's the revolution that's going to happen and make a huge difference. And that's the added value that one can be doing for every company. You don't need to have rows of ultra IT experts. You just need to have people who are capable of, moving screens around, which we do all the time.
I just want to add a question. Do you see more opportunities for consolidation on a geographic base, or more on a, let's say, vertical industry base?
Well, it depends on the company. For one of our social care companies, what they're doing is they're buying mini versions of themselves, as well as growing organically with greenfield sites. For instance, our medical device CRO, it's trying to do two things with its acquisitions. One, it's trying to buy geography, because although you can have one person in France, and in theory you're in France, in practice that doesn't really work for a CRO. And at the same time, if it can, it wants to buy geographies and add further services to the things it's got to offer. So there's a geographic plus extra services buy and build process. So it does depend, Khalid, on really kind of what what company you're looking at. The answer is both, in fact.
Derek, I believe you wanted to comment on something David said.
I did. I just wanted to completely agree with David's position on this idea that you don't need banks of people anymore to do stuff. You know, our RPA is awesome. You know, there are a substantial number of no-code and low-code tools out there. So previously you would have had to have been a developer to get stuff done. You don't need to do that anymore. David's what David said is right. You can have people moving boxes around, and that creates stuff. I think it's, you know, 10 years ago, we always said, when our kids go through school, we have to get them to learn how to code. This was the mantra that we had embedded into our education system. We now find ourselves on the precipice of an environment where actually being able to prompt an AI to do the development for you, and the neural net will build your code for you, will become a higher skill than being a developer. Now, developers will still be there, but it'll be markedly different than it is today. People in organizations, investors, organizations will be doing the development work themselves and not developers. So I really agree with the point that David made.
Just final question, David, is we look at, and then I'll jump to you, Derek, on the same point, is that integration is not easy to achieve, and it's becoming even more complicated in Europe. How do you see the capacity to really build a patient-centric approach even more within this industry in the future?
When you say integration, you mean integration of different companies, or the integration of systems, or
both? Having different companies using different systems, bringing them together, interoperability, and this type of hurdle that you might face.
The good news for the systems is that APIs are getting cheaper and much more plentiful and much easier, again, like everything in IT, to use. Integrating people is much more difficult because you have obviously kind of natural social differences between countries. You have language, obviously, which is a problem, and you have that cultural country thing. So we spend a lot of effort. The effort gets multiplied if we're going cross-border, definitely. And the truth is that it takes at least a year to integrate a business, but we are not keen on having this situation where you're kind of ramming companies together and you're not integrating them, because if you're not doing that, you're not going to extract the synergies. You're not going to have an ethos that transfers from geography to geography, and you're not going to have, frankly, a happy company, because they're not going to understand each other if they haven't spent the time integrating. So it's hard yards, but it's really worth it, because then you get the revenue and the cost and the breadth of service synergies. So it's hard yards, but it's worth doing.
Derek, what's your view on that?
Yes, agree with all of that. I think, you know, when I think about it from the and everything that David's mentioned there is, you know, it's very similar for me and the team at Marcol. These are it's hard work, you know, cultural, technological, market, social, all of these things. You know, we're dealing with human beings at the end of the day, and we need to, you know, invest in the human, and invest in and listen to their, you know, concerns when these things happen, and, you know, act in the spirit of building, you know, multidiscipline collegiate businesses. When we think about the kind of to the specific point you mentioned on integration, you know, healthcare is super complex. It's impossible to understand all of it, and as it becomes probably smarter, let's call it, I think it's also going to become more fragmented as well. So I think, you know, anybody that has to do some sort of strategic assessment of value or opportunity, has to look at whether the technology can communicate and function effectively within that kind of broader healthcare ecosystem, and then drive value for all the participants, the patients, the clinicians, the shareholders, whomever. And to David's point, we are, things do become cheaper. API technologies there. We've got a bunch of really well known and well understood healthcare protocols in FHIR, which is part of HL7. We've got DICOM for medical imaging, and then where there are unintegrated operabilities, where you've got things like device standards, so Garmin versus Apple versus Sun2 versus Whoop. I actually wear two different things because I'm a bit of a data geek. I wear them for different reasons. Actually, I wear this for sport, and I wear this because this does a really terrible job of telling me how well I've slept. Though my wife tells me that I should just take both of them off and let her know how I feel in the morning, like they used to do in the old days. So you have products like Terra, which is effectively an API for wearables that does a middleware arbitration function that means that I can consume Terra's data, and Terra are consuming data from Apple Health and Sun2 and Garmin and everyone else. And then wrapped around that, we spoke about this earlier, so I don't really want to spend too much time on it. There is that whole point on data governance. So you might be integrated, but are you governing yourself properly? And is that governance recognized at board level? And then that kind of trickles through. So it's not just a question of data and integration. It becomes a question of trust, security, privacy, and ethics at the end of the day.
Great. Thank you very much for your time and for the attendees that joined us, and looking forward to other conversations around the future and the opportunities of investing in healthcare. Thank you very much.